family. This is the video for our overview. I'm having to use a different setup to record this video, so I'm sorry that I can't fit in the information as I would like you to see it. I would really love for you to be able to see both sides of the full page, but we're just going to work with what we have for now. So on this overview, usually I have you make your overview with the intention of putting everything on there that you think that you would need if you were allowed to use this overview on your exam. So if you haven't done your exam yet, this would be really, really good practice for the AP exam. I would move forward and make this overview with the intention that you're going to try to take or do your take-home test with just your overview. I think that that would be very enlightening and tell you if these overviews are helpful and how much they're helpful. If there are things that you don't know that you need to look up, then I would seriously consider adding it to your overview. So I'm going to say that one more time just to make sure that everybody understands. If you haven't done your test yet, I would very highly, aggressively suggest that you use this overview that you can see behind me to try to do that take-home exam. And then any information that's not on this that you needed to complete your take-home exam, even if it's help that you needed to get from me, I would add it to your overview. Why? Why am I having you do that? And why am I even having you make an overview if you're taking a take-home test? Because when we start really studying for your AP exam that's coming up so soon, if you have been making your overviews and you've been doing a pretty good job on them, all you have to study when you are working on your course reviews, when you are preparing for that comprehensive AP exam, is your overviews. You don't have to go searching through your notes. You don't have to go through and make a bunch of flashcards if you don't want to. You can come to these overviews that we've made, and this is all of the essential information that you need. So even though you have a take-home exam for Unit 9, I think this is Unit 9, for this unit, I still think that it's extremely helpful for you to make the overview, and that is why I am having you turn it in and counting it against your grade. So I'm basically going to just zoom in on each part of the overview and only talk about things that I think might need some clarification. The one thing that I want to highlight that is a theme, I shouldn't say the one thing. So one thing I want to highlight is when we do a hypothesis test, we do it from the assumption that the null is true. So I have highlighted everywhere on this side of our overview, every place that it explicitly states that we move from or work from the assumption the null is true. It's just like the judicial system in our country. When you are charged with a crime, it is innocent until proven guilty. So the null is true until it's proven it's not. When we run a significance test, we are trying to figure out which of these is true. The claim is true and we got an unusual sample just by chance, or the claim is really not true. This goes through what does a test statistic measure. So how many standard deviations from the sample value, or how many standard deviations the sample value is from the population value. And I'm not sure that I wrote this down anywhere, so I'm glad we're going over this. The test statistic is your Z or T. When they say what does the test statistic measure, they're referring to the Z value or the T value that you use to find your probability. What is your p-value? I think this is straightforward. We didn't really talk about this in class because we never had p-values that were this low. But essentially, if your calculator gives you one of these weird numbers, you have to use scientific notation. So you take this decimal place and you move it 5 to the left. Here you move the decimal place 3 to the left. These numbers here tell you how many places to move the decimal, and this symbol here tells you that you're going in the negative or the left-hand direction. When we interpret a p-value, you begin with if the null is true, and you use context, there is a 5% probability of getting the sample value of 15 hours just by chance in a random sample of 10 batteries. So make sure that you feel comfortable interpreting a p-value. So this is just the framework. You need to fill in the context. So if I'm using that battery example, if the null is true, you would say if this company's batteries truly last for 18 hours, there is a 3% probability of getting a sample value of 15 hours just by chance in a random sample of 8 batteries. This describes how to find the p-value for a z-test, and then right next to it is finding the p-value for a t-test. Remember, these two things are your test statistic. Then carrying on from here, this is trying to specifically show you what you're actually finding when you get a p-value. So it is an area under the curve. Notice that the area that's shaded matches the symbol on your alternative hypothesis. The t-table is the same. You would draw it exactly the same, except for having a z there, you would have a t. So if you did this for a t statistic, you draw your picture exactly the same. Proper format for any significance test is your state, plan, do, conclude. So these are all the things that you need to do in each section. On the conclude, make sure you explicitly compare your p-value to your significance level. Explicitly write reject or fail to reject. Never abbreviate fail to reject. So never say we FTR. No, write it out. And then you have to say if there's convincing evidence in terms of the alternative. So if we're doing this, we would say, since our p-value of 6.8% is bigger than our alpha of 1%, we fail to reject the null. We do not have convincing evidence that the batteries last longer than 18 hours. That's what use the HA for context means. You look at what your HA is and you say we do not have convincing evidence for the HA, or we have convincing evidence for the HA. These next up are the conditions for each test. You want to make sure that you know what each test is, know how to describe what test you're doing. The ones for proportions are really important. You use p instead of p hat in your calculations because we assume the null is true. So because we're assuming it's true, that's what we use instead of our sample value. T-tests are more involved. Remember, sometimes you're going to have to graph. And then paired test, same conditions above. Make sure that you explicitly state what you're subtracting. And this is normally your null. Mu sub d equals 0 is normally your null. So that is the front side of this overview. If any of this is confusing, make sure that you get that cleared up. Ask me and get it cleared up, especially the framework the state plan do conclude. And make sure you know exactly what I mean here when I say you have to write, you have convincing evidence or you don't, and you write it based off of the alternative. Okay, the back side, the first part is the connection between significance tests and confidence intervals. Sorry, my face is in the way probably. And we go through our errors, and I didn't really explain this when we did this in class with the notes, but the reason that the thing 1, thing 2 are there is because if it's a type 1, the number 1 is true, and the number 1 would be the null. If it's a type 2, that means number 2 is true, and 2 would be the alternative. So the first thing you write is the null, so a type 1 would mean 1 is true. The second thing you write is the alternative. A type 2 means thing 2 is true. So hopefully that helps to remember. This is talking about the relationship between power, significance level, and alpha. Next up, we have some formulas that relate alpha, power, and type 2 errors. We have our little graphic. We have some questions here to answer. And then arguably the most important element of this overview is grouping the right phrases together. So one box is all of the things that go with rejecting the null. The other box is all of the things that go with failing to reject the null. And then lastly is our our important calculator functions from this unit. So we use one variable stats and t-tests for mu and mu sub d. Okay, so I think this is pretty straightforward. Like I said, if you need clarification, make sure that you see me and get that cleared up so that you can use these overviews to benefit you the most. I would imagine that the power, like this, will probably really, from thing 1, thing 2, all the way up to this, these ideas between power type 1 and type 2 errors, you really have to sit down and really get your thinking cap on to make those connections. So make sure that you reach out if you're having a hard time making those connections. Okay, that's it. Love you guys.